Good morning or good afternoon. Welcome, and we're so glad you're here. Thank you for taking time out of your day, your busy day. We know an hour is sometimes hard to get, so thank you for being here. With this is actually our second webinar of the year, so we're super excited about this one. And with this series of webinars, we're hoping to inform, inspire, and provide you with actionable ways to move forward, driving positive change and driving impact in your companies, all, no matter what challenges come our way, all while building our community. So before we get started, I'll just have a couple of housekeeping not rules, I hate rules, a couple of housekeeping items. We're going to have a Q&A at the end. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. Alicia Gaucher, who's our operations manager, will be managing the chat throughout. We are recording this webinar as well, and it will be hosted on our website. Alicia will send out a follow-up email with a link to that webinar, with a link to the recording. Please feel free to share that with your community. And also for those who I know intended to be here but could not, we're recording it for that reason as well. So with that, I want to welcome our guest, one guest, one in-house person. We're thrilled to have Annmarie Neal with us today. She's the Chief People Officer at Zendesk and the founder for the Center for Leadership Innovation and the author of Leading from the Edge, Global Executives Share Strategies for Success. So welcome, Annmarie. And then we have our very own Marilyn Nagel, who is the Chief Strategy Officer and a co-founder of Rise Results. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome. Glad you're here.
It's fun to be here.
Okay, so Annmarie, I'm going to start with you. The first question is, how does culture impact engagement, innovation, and retention?
Well, yes, of course.
It does.
It does. Look, I think in terms of systems, and an organization is a system. And, a system obviously should start with strategy, and then you have all the parts and pieces that connect around, whether it's the functions, the enabling processes, systems and technologies, and then obviously the culture, which is the way we work, the behaviors, the leadership ethos that you have in the company. And so, if we're not thoughtful about how we shape culture, we will or we won't have, So let's take Procter and Gamble. Their culture is very much a culture of innovation. And so as a result, they have massive amounts of innovation. You could say Google's culture is a culture of innovation, massive amounts of innovation. Not to be disrespectful, but maybe a steel company that washes and rinses and repeats the same, manufacturing technologies may have a different kind of culture, because their culture might be about safety and about regulation and about environmental concerns, et cetera. So absolutely, culture will inform how an organization behaves, and how an organization behaves will either drive more or less innovation, more or less engagement, more or less action orientation, et cetera.
Great. Thank you. Marilyn, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I can share. I was just talking yesterday with a former intern that worked with both Annmarie and me, and she's working at a nonprofit, and she reached out to me because she's frustrated with the culture and is really trying to act as a change agent. And every time she does recommends a process improvement, she has been hitting a wall.
Right.
And so we were chatting about the fact that the culture where she is one where people blame others, don't feel safe making a mistake, and are burning out. And so there's high turnover, a lot of churn, a lot of fear around, well, I didn't do that. No, that happened, but it wasn't my fault. It was, and so a lot of this, they did it kind of a thing. And so we talked about the fact that the culture that she's working in, even though it's a nonprofit, and her attraction to working there was the mission, which is why people go to work for nonprofits. But this culture of toxicity, of fear, of you can't make a mistake, you can't change anything, no, you can't push back on unrealistic expectations. You can't even raise unrealistic expectations. The CEO says things like, don't come to me with a problem, only come to me with a solution. I don't want to hear about problems. Um, and so it was just such a clear illustration of what we were going to talk about today, that even in a fairly small nonprofit, culture overshadows everything around the way the employees behave, attraction, retention, innovation. There's no innovation of process. There's no, it's not like you're going to innovate product there, but they can't even innovate on process or clean things up. So it came to my mind that this is a perfect illustration for what we're going to talk about.
Well, it's so interesting that you said the CEO fill in the blank, because so much of culture is either amplified and or dampened by CEO and executive behavior, right? We want to be a culture of X, Y, and Z, and we put the posters on the wall and everybody feels it from the brand, but then the executive team behaves differently or signals, like they did with our prior intern, that those behaviors are not allowed or not encouraged, then people will, they'll read what they see as opposed to read what is on the wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So on that note, what kind of systems and behaviors shape those high performing teams? So
Yeah,
thinking about the previous intern and her experience, and we've all had experiences
yeah,
in
yeah,
companies where the executives didn't match what they were, what was on the walls was not actually matched.
yeah. I mean, I think a couple. I think first of all, and then I'll give you some examples of companies that I've seen along the way. I think first of all, appreciating that it's a system, all the parts and pieces need to work together, right? And so when the parts and pieces work together, the culture, probably is strong and dynamic. When the parts and pieces, disconnect, then parts miss. The things that I look for when I'm, either doing diligence on a company or assessing a company culture, I look for, uh, are the goals aligned to the ambition of the company, first of all? So we want to be X, we want to be, an AI first high tech company. Then the goals align to that. Or are the goals mismatched, Kim? And when they're mismatched, then immediately it sends, like Marilyn just described, it sends signals into the system that they say they want to be this, but the goals are driving us in a different direction. So it's really important to make sure that who we want to be and our ambition is aligned to the ways in which we're setting our goals, long-term and short-term. So that would be one. The second is leadership behavior. So does your leadership system align to the ambition and the culture that you desire? We want to be an AI first company, but our leadership is spending tons of time on productivity metrics instead of innovation metrics, right? So is the leadership focused on the right things? Are they making decisions that embrace and drive, as opposed to create confusion and disconnect? So it's your leadership system. The third, no surprise to your audience, is your reinforcement systems and all of the systems of reinforcement, right? So, we're all human beings. At the end of the day, we jump for green M&Ms and we don't jump for brown ones, right? So, are people being reinforced for the right behaviors? Are teams being reinforced for the right behaviors? Is the system being reinforced for the right behaviors? And sometimes there are multiple levels to this in understanding reinforcement. For example, who's talked about in company all hands, and or right? Are the people and or the teams being talked about, does that reinforce the messages that you would want to reinforce and the behaviors you would want to reinforce to the culture and strategy? I like to look at how actual pay and promotions are distributed. We're a company of team, and we really want collaboration, and we really want our teams working cross-organizationally together. But our annual cycle reinforces individual behavior. And so it's not teams that are getting bonused, it's individuals that are getting bonus. So, at the end of the day, people say like, well, I need to be part of a team, but I'm the one at the end who gets paid if my stars are greater than others' stars, right? And so if it's a system of forced distribution and you want collaboration, your reinforcement system is not aligned to what you're trying to create culturally. So I think that's really important. And then I think the fourth system I would say is your development system. Your feedback and development system has to be very much in alignment with what you're trying to create culturally and strategically in the company. And here's where I see a lot of people missing the mark. There some organizations that are phenomenally good at aligning development initiatives to strategy, and there are some companies that outsource to lots of different vendors, and the vendors come in with their, I like to use wash, rinse, repeat programs, and they do what I call spray and pray, and it worked over here at that company. And so therefore it will work here in your company, and probably 60% of it will work and 40% of it will either really not work or it'll dilute the impact. And Marilyn, you and I have worked recently with a provider that, would wash, rinse, repeat. And it's really unfortunate because you spend a lot of money to develop your people, and every moment in development matters. Every moment matters if you're thinking in terms of driving, new culture, especially if you're doing culture transformation and or innovation.
So just a follow-up question to that, speaking of the development piece and coming in and washing, rinse, repeat. I know when we come in and do development programs, we spend a lot of time with our contact trying to understand, what the culture is, what are some of the items that they, what's going on, and how can we make, even though it's kind of a standard program, how to make it more, I don't like the word bespoke, but I say it.
Yeah.
For the client. So in a situation like that, if you have somebody, and you both probably can answer this, if you have somebody, a vendor coming in and it's a wash, rinse, and repeat, or what did you say? Pray and what was
Spray and pray.
Spray and pray.
Pray and pray. How do you work with a consultant or a vendor to
Yeah.
say this isn't working for our culture?
I think you just really have to understand what you want and what you need and how you need your experience created and then delivered, and then hold very high expectations in the contracting phase, working with partners. Partners usually will work with you, vendors typically don't, right? And so, I think talking to other clients of theirs to understand the strengths and frustrations that they might have experienced is super helpful. I mean, you have to do your diligence if you're going to give your program to somebody else to deliver. I have historically never done that. I really strongly believe in developing in-house and using partners to help amplify the program, but have the program, the core of the program developed, from the teams that are closest to strategy and closest to the culture. And then, knowing where you bring parts and pieces in to make it interesting and so forth. And I will say, when I've not done that in my career, I've regretted it almost always. And when I have done that in my career, it's been a better product for the company.
And it takes longer to do that in-house development. I'll say from the other side of the house, from being on both sides of this equation, both an in-house
Mhm.
person and now on the consulting side, we get requests for a proposal. We put together based on what the client says, we put together a proposal, and then they want a lot more detail. And our response is, we can't give you more detail until we know more about your company because we're going to develop
Right.
this program custom to what your needs are.
Mhm.
We don't do an off the shelf, we don't take it off the shelf and
Right.
repurpose what we did for four other companies.
Right. Well, that's why, Marilyn, honestly, you and Kim are so great to work with because I would put your teams in the camp of actually we're looking at a problem together and we're figuring out how to solve the problem together. That's a very different partnership for
That's
me.
a partnership.
Then, I'm going to buy, I don't want to name names, but XYZ manager development and they
Mhm.
bring it in and they do a simulation and, it's the simulation
Right,
they used at Alcoa and it's the simulation they used at Pepsi and it's the simulation
right.
used at,
And sometimes they even have those names on the slides, and you're
yeah,
like,
of
wait a
course.
minute.
Yeah, exactly.
Could you at
Yeah,
least clean the
exactly.
slides
Yeah,
up? But
yeah.
but the challenge is, and I think for those listening to this, if you get a proposal that's fully baked, be wary of it. It
Yeah,
should not be fully baked until
good
the
point.
the provider
Yes,
understands exactly what
yeah.
you need and the nuance of
Mhm.
what's going on inside your company, your culture, your the specifics of what you need. Because if they don't have that insight, they're going to give you something that you could develop using ChatGPT. It's just going to be
Yeah.
an off
Give
the
you a, I'll
shelf
give you a perfect
package.
example of that and you'll appreciate. So we do a bit of an action learning forum type executive program, and we use uh, we use a partner that helps bring in the strategy. He's a guru and he teaches strategy at a major university, and so he can come in and he brings all of the jokes and the theories and the examples and so forth. And I'm putting a session on with him. We have been working now from Cisco to H&F, and now he's here helping me do something at Zendesk. We've worked together almost 20 years. And we're putting this on probably for the, I don't know, 40th time. And he said, okay, ready to go. I have the straw man of what we'll do. Um, which executives can I meet with to refresh my understanding of the company and the situation and where are we today? So we're going to do this in September. He just did a session in January. He could have said, well, let's just lift January into
Mhm.
um,
No,
September and basically said, well, you guys are in the middle of a transformation. A lot is changing. So I want to hear what's going on with the business strategy. I want to know how the culture transformation is going. What are the things we want to emphasize? What are the things maybe we can take out? Oh, AI is really big and important right now. How do we put more AI in? I'll change that session. So, even in the 80%
yep,
standardized, there's always opportunity to flex.
yep.
Yeah, and our flexing has strategy evolved and has in your transformation, where's culture? So, going back to the conversation we're having, it's very much, what are we trying to accomplish from the business perspective? And what does that mean for the leadership development experiences we want to, gen up in the session to drive that home?
The two biggies.
Yeah, and I'll just circle back to something you said. The vendor versus partner piece is so important. So thank you for that because we always feel like we're partners, not
Yeah.
vendors.
Yeah. We're
Yeah.
not a big box store.
No. No. Okay. So moving on. Annmarie, I'll start with you with this one. How do leaders at every level align culture with their business strategy?
Yeah. I mean, look, I this is hard work. It's hard work. And I feel like in the, whatever you call it in your company, long range planning, as you're doing your strategy work, there has to be an almost equal amount of time given to the organization that we're trying to create, that amplifies execution of strategy. And what I often see is people don't give it that much time. They've read the HBR on what a culture should be. Maybe they chat GPT, Marilyn, on what, what should a product company
Complexity, that's
culture
good.
should be. And then they kind of say, oh, those 5, 6 things, those sound right. We'll underscore those. But honestly, really understanding how you need your people to work, how you need them to make decisions, how you need them to engage with each other. Where does power sit? Where does strategy development sit? I mean, these are all really important culture decisions to think about as you're taking strategy, to action. And I often see companies really miss it. So I'm sitting in a environment now, and we're very much innovation oriented company. And I gave the CEO feedback this weekend. He's like, I need a policy on this. I need a policy on that. I need a policy on this. And the policies were just stupid policy stuff. This is not about the policy. I said, the fewer policies we have, the more innovative people will be. We want the policy to be around leadership and innovation and empowerment and make good decisions, and it's okay to make a little bit of a mistake. It's okay to experiment. It's okay to ask for help. That's the policy, right? Versus, whatever I don't want to say what the policy was. You'll all laugh at me. But and sometimes what I think is at the core for CEOs is control. And when they're feeling like they can let go of control, they'll actually empower an organization when they feel like, times are a little bit difficult right now. A lot is going on, economically, geopolitically, right? So there's a little bit more of companies feeling like they have to get into their let's hunker down energy, right? These are the times when you have to sort of say, what is the culture we want and how do we behave in good times? And then more importantly, do we behave the same way in more difficult times? So the organization sees that consistency and that ethos living, in when it's, I'd like to say the sun is shining and the cupcakes are yummy versus when, the sun isn't shining and the cupcakes are stale.
Yeah.
Marilyn, we talk about business strategy a lot and culture?
Yeah, and I guess so. Anne-Marie's working with the top level. I do a lot of work with the first line level, with the with employee resource groups, that they're executive sponsors who are at the top level, but also those first line managers and those individual contributors. And for them, often they have no clue, and they are stewards of the culture, but they don't necessarily have the amplification around what is our strategy and culture and how those pieces fit together. It has not.
Yeah.
The executive leadership team thinks everyone knows.
Mm.
The and because it's so clear to them.
Yeah.
But at the grassroots level, at the individual contributor level, they feel the culture.
Mm.
They feel it, and they understand the company strategy to some degree, but they don't always have the connection. And so for them, where what I notice is companies that thrive have a better connection when
So
they get it.
here's the thing that I think you'd appreciate, Marilyn, given what you've just said, and I know our work together. So I know, we've done this.
Yeah.
It, the importance of manager development and manager enablement. And, and I think about it as manager enablement. Our managers need to be enabled to take strategy to action. They need to be enabled to understand how to prioritize in very agile environments, right? I mean, they're
Yeah.
getting spun by their employees, they're getting
Yeah.
spun by the customer, they're getting spun by senior executives who are changing, what's important this week. I mean, it's like and enabling that layer in the organization is probably the most strategic intervention a smart company will have around strategy to culture to enabling and empowering an organization. So at
Exactly.
Zendesk, I was super frustrated. I was in a seconded situation here for a little while. So I was what I like to call the foster parent, not the actual parent. And I was super frustrated because like, it's all about the manager, it's all about the manager, it's all about the manager. So then when I came in formally, I was like, okay, this 2025 is the year of the manager. And I have made a huge big deal about the year of the manager. Every month I write a note to the managers. I talk about something, I embrace them, love them, engage them, and some important thing about, what the theme of the month is.
Yeah.
We put together in 1 month, thanks to ChatGPT, in 1 month, we put together what we call our Manager Accelerator Program. We went around the world to 8 sites and held 60 to 75 people per site on the same week. And we literally rolled in the morning with Asia, and then just moved to Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Eastern US, Western US, all the way, and then did it for
Right.
4 days with this blast of manager enablement. And it was all common content, so the content similar, but engaging these manager communities. So you talk about communities, Marilyn, we're creating
Yep.
community with managers so they can talk about what it means to be a manager. What does it mean to hold the culture of the company? What does it mean when you get the culture survey results and your survey results are not where you want them to be? What is my obligation to my people to show up in this work? But then, how do I do that? Now I have a community of people and a community of facilitators where we're creating these, what we call learning circles, where we're learning rapid prototyping solutions to situations that are coming up. And so we're enabling this group to be, self-serving and not
Yep.
need somebody to come from somewhere down off of somewhere to kind of impart the wisdom of leadership life. We're building it into the ethos of that middle layer in the company. So we did 330 people in 1 week, and we'll do probably 450 people. We're doing it again in October. We had everybody engaged in the company. We had site
Yeah.
leaders, senior leaders. I taught a program directly. We had master classes for people who were a little bit, more switched on and wanted to have more advanced content. And we called it a pilot. We like literally piloted it, and we built it off of ChatGPT for the most part, and then put our brains on it and said, okay, what can we do? So I don't think it has to be big and complicated, but it has to be very precise and
Exactly.
connected. Yeah,
Yeah.
precise and connected.
And that is where companies make a difference. When they do that work, it's like everything opens up because the mid-level managers and first-level managers are the keepers.
Connected.
That's it.
Right.
And I mean, it's just I'm so delighted to hear that example, because that every time we see companies, when we work with different companies and we see companies that engage that group, we know the culture is going to be strong and thriving and vibrant, and they can adapt.
Right.
Where they're disconnected and there's this group versus and this group and there's
Yeah.
nothing in the middle,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
where you find all kinds of trouble happens.
Well, I'll tell you, and you know this about me, Marilyn, I love doing executive development, but I had so much fun working with these managers because they are so open to learning, and they're eager and they're thirsty and they're hungry and they're what, they'll come in on Monday and they'll fight you, and then they'll come in on Tuesday and they're like pensive, and they come in on Wednesday and they're activated, and Thursday they're, ready to go win. So it's such a fast evolution of development
And
process
they're the
because of
future
where they are,
executives.
where they are in life, right? They're very hungry
Right.
for being effective.
I think too, is something you said, Annmarie. I mean, people think about changing culture and it's such a big foreboding problem, right? You did it pretty quickly with this group, right? You
Right,
with
right.
chat, all of these,
Yeah,
tools that you can use, but it doesn't have to be this,
right.
long. It can.
100%. Yeah. Well, and so that was the situation, because the team that was working on this, they not to disparage the team, they were doing it the old-fashioned way. They were doing it like, you do a pilot, and you do it for 6 months, and then you assess it, and you look at the findings, and then you roll it out. I'm like, okay, well, we have 1,000 managers, and you just hit 30 people in 6 months. Like this, the laws of time are not going to work in our favor here. And so basically, we use the company culture that we were trying to create, which is fast, innovative, make a few mistakes along the way, but that's okay. Set it up that it's a pilot, learn while you're doing it. Like we course corrected in the middle of it. So you think in terms of 330 people in this pilot, and we were like, ooh, wait a minute. On paper, this felt like really good, but like we're in the middle of it right now in the room, the energy, we're going with that, and so you just have to, and that's our culture here. Is like,
Yeah.
it isn't a, long 20-year design theory culture. And so working in the energy of the culture you're trying to create and reinforcing your design principles, to the culture you're reinforcing, against strategy, actually was part of what we were solving for.
And you did it at every level, which that is the model. I mean, that's kind of the kind of thing we used to do in our Cisco days too.
Right, right. We're doing the same thing now with a women's summit for our employee communities. So we're doing the same thing. We're doing a couple of days, is it scrappy, make it work, put it together, engage so it's the community for the community kind of mentality. And so that's kicking off in, I think, July.
That's great. Okay. Uh, we're good on time. So another question would be, what are some of the biggest misses that you see companies or leaders make when it comes to tying culture to strategy?
Yeah. Okay. A few big misses. One, the culture you want isn't aligned to what the strategy demands. So there's just, there's a philosophical that disconnect. I want a culture that's all about love and friendliness, but I'm in a really aggressive, highly competitive landscape where dog eat dog in the market. Hard, right? Hard, because you need that edge in your culture in order to put it out into the, yeah. The second is leadership. So leaders that don't emulate the culture that you're trying to create. I often say one bad leader will undo the work of 100 good. Right. And so if one bad leader gets away with lots of bad behavior, people are going to look at why that leader is allowed to fill in the blank, as opposed to all these other 99 leaders who are amazing and, trying, so they'll pay attention to that. I think when the incentives are unaligned, as we talked about earlier, and incentives make a big difference, because that's how people, get their feedback and get the, financial acknowledgement. And the last is when they underestimate the power of symbolism. Symbolism is really important when you're either reinforcing a culture or you're changing a culture. And so it's those little baby symbols along the way that can amplify the shift in culture. And when people miss those opportunities, yeah, really. So we're having a very thoughtful discussion on a really important topic. Let's pay attention. Laptops down. That's a symbol. I mean, it's a silly symbol. It's a symbol. Is this important? Our laptops are closed. You know, we're having a different kind of conversation that's much more energetic and active. Maybe we're walking. I don't know. I'm just making it up. But the symbols of the symbol of the map program I just talked about, and that we're doing it fast, we're doing it efficient, we're going to make mistakes. It's all okay. We're in it together. We're here collectively to make it better. It's a symbol of how we're going to work together, more broadly. So I think
You
that's
shared an example earlier of who's spotlighted at an all hands.
all hands is a good
Those are
symbol.
really
Yeah.
powerful
Yeah.
symbols. And we hear it on the back end that there was a program about Black History Month, and all the speakers were white.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
You know,
Right.
who thought up that program?
Exactly. Yeah. 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 But I mean, I think little
Or all
things.
men, all men,
I was speaking we had a pride employee community session, and I was listening to a colleague speak about his experience, and it was great because he was saying that he looks at how welcomed he'll be in a company. Well, like, what's the culture for someone to be welcomed and, for inclusive environment. And he said it was in the benefits that he had for partners.
Mhm.
Right? So like symbolic, right? And it's like,
Absolutely.
and like somebody wasn't thinking about that, they could totally miss an opportunity. Somebody like, okay, it isn't about, are we all marching in the parade? It's, do you take care of my family, when it matters to me, right? And making my life better because so little symbols like that, I think, are
Yep.
really important. And I think this is where junior people miss, because they're not architects of a system. I keep going back to the system because I think this is the point I would make, is that they're program people, Kim, and they're like, we need to do this. GE did that, Google does this, so we better do it too to be competitive. And it's actually, you don't have to do everything. You just have to make it all aligned to what you're trying to create.
Love that.
We hear over and over again from women, there are no women on stage at our all hands.
Mhm.
Not,
Right.
90% of the 80 to 90% of the time. That is such a powerful symbol for women, just that there's no women on stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
At all hands meeting, at company all hands meetings, that symbol is incredibly powerful. The other one, I think I just want to punctuate it's a case study that I use in the board class I teach, and that's the example I use is the Wells Fargo case, where the culture incentive was one thing and the pay incentive was enough misaligned, and so people were opening accounts because that was the way. That
Yeah.
was a real heavy push, and you would be fired if you didn't make your quotas around account openings. But the culture was in a different direction, and all of a sudden they were like and
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
people were not paying attention to the fact the incentive system was misaligned
Yeah.
with the values.
Yeah.
So it plays out over and over again when you have a misalignment with your values or your culture. And that's the other thing, values. Things like break things and move fast and break things. Um, that might have made sense in some cultures, but to other people, that's like, yeah, well, you're going to break me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so those words matter
Mhm.
and are signals to people more so than they used to be.
Yeah, but what I will say, Marilyn, I agree with you. And what I would say is, having, especially coming out of financial services and seeing a lot of, when I was at H&F, I saw a lot of different kinds of companies and the cultures of those companies. I would say that the transparency about who you are and how that fits your strategy, and being really clear about that, even if the culture is going to be a very difficult, grinding,
Right.
when you think in terms of a Goldman Sachs type
Yep.
culture, I mean, unapologetic
Yep.
how
Be
demanding
who you are.
is for, right. But people say, you know what? I'm going to go there. This is going to be a great experience. I'm going to make my bazillions and bazillions, and I'm going to learn as much as I can. And then I'm going to go do something else, and so they sign up for a very specific experience, but it's transparent in that
Yes.
this is the experience versus if you were going to, and I'm picking on Goldman, I love Goldman, so this is not a bad thing. But if you went to Goldman and you said, we're going to coddle you and love you and cuddle you, and we're going to have all these wonderful refresh Fridays so that you can be with your family.
Yeah.
And then you get there,
It's not.
that's not what it is. Because that's what their business demands, like their
Right.
strategy demands that these people are on 24/7, 365. Right, that's where the disconnect, and
Yeah.
that's when people get resentful because they're like, wait a minute, I signed up for, and that's not what you're delivering.
Yeah. And I completely agree with you. If
Yeah,
you're going to be a hectic, crazy
right,
work culture,
yeah,
then be
right,
clear about it. And
yeah,
if you're going to be and and you can use language that's reflective of that, that makes it clear.
yeah,
It's,
yeah. I mean, look at all the people that worked with Steve Jobs for years. I mean, the stories about, Steve and,
oh yeah.
his incredible cultural and of mania. And those people will speak about that time at Apple as being some of the most interesting dynamic. I've never done better work than I did in this
Right.
environment. But like he never apologized for being the crazy founder of
No.
Apple. So I think it's the disconnect. And I think this is where it gets really interesting, Kim, when you go into transforming culture, because what happens is, people are part of a culture and then strategy demands a shift. And so now you have to also make, the system, right? The culture system has to shift too. And now all of a sudden you have all these people who signed up for one experience and are now part of something that's shifting. That's, I think, when it's really hard. It's easy to be the Goldman example or the Apple example. It's easy to be I'm the super kind, loving that company. But when you're going from one to the other,
Yeah.
people get very resentful. They get resistant. They don't understand why. And so that's where the change management really has to go on, amped up on steroids a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to ask one more question before we go to some of the audience questions. And I think this is even more important before the current climate. I don't want to get political, but given the current climate, what's going on in the US, before the time we're in now, right? A lot of companies that had locations outside of the US, that we often heard that they felt like they were kind of outposts of what they were doing in the US and forcing their culture on those locations. So you both have worked across multiple industries and geographies. And how do you approach building a culture that's both global but also deeply local
Yeah.
at the same time?
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I think in terms of the 80/20, 80% standardized, 20% localized. In some countries, that has to go 60/40, like Japan, right? Japan would need a lot more customization given their culture and the language versus other countries, Ireland, which would feel maybe 90, 10, right? So I think part of it is really understanding the globe and really understanding the cultures, country cultures of the markets in which you serve, and really importantly, the customers in those markets that you serve. But I think there are tenets that we talked about that would transport across the globe, irrespective. Like your leadership capability needs to be, you know, aligned. Your behaviors need to be aligned. Now, how do those play out in Singapore versus how they play out in Krakow? For sure, they will feel very different. I go to values to answer this question, though, right? So to me, it's the values of the company that need to transport across. And where are you willing to take country values or region values over corporate values? And that's where it gets super tricky. So for example, we in the US in Zendesk today feel everybody has the opportunity to come to the company and be their best self, whomever they wish to be, no judgment. We're like, come as you are. We believe in you. You do great work. You have a place here at Zendesk. But if you go to Krakow, it's that, there's regions of the city where that is not true, right? And so do we as Zendesk, to the management there, say you have to hold to the values of Zendesk corporate, or do we say we allow you to take the values of, what might be true on the ground, and we say it's the values of the company outrule the values of the local. In Japan, it might be the opposite. Because the Japanese culture is so much stronger. It's so ingrained in how they behave, what's important to them. Then we might say, okay, are we Zendesk Japan or are we Japan Zendesk? Right. So I think you have to be super, super smart about what's going on around the globe.
Yeah, Marilyn, do you have anything to?
No, I think Annmarie said it. I think the only additional thing is just to be sensitive to how you inform
Yeah.
and are transparent toward your employees that may be doing assignments. If you have that, and I think you just take care of your employees in a way that is transparent around if you're going to do an assignment in this country, these are some things that you need to be aware of culturally. And I think that's pretty standard practice for most companies to let people know. You know, you're not going to be in Dubai as a woman alone and not be aware of what you're going to be dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's
You don't want to send a woman to,
yeah.
you don't want to send someone into a culture
Mm,
without getting them acculturated,
yeah.
beforehand and using tools. The other thing that I think that we come across is just this a bit of for global multinationals to recognize, and we still hear the stories of the meetings at 2 a.m. for the people outside the US. And so just a little more cultural sensitivity and understanding that yeah, the Dutch are going to be direct and the whatever those different cultural nuances that are going to impact collaboration. And the more we can help employees understand those cultural nuances that overlay the way we work together, the better it is for easing
Mm,
cross-cultural collaboration, not just across geographies, but also in the US. Those are just getting more and more necessary as we become more globalized, wherever we happen to be, even if you don't have locations there. Otherwise, it's a bit of a culture shock for
yeah.
some.
I think it is tricky, and again, not to be political as well, but it is tricky given the geopolitical landscape right now. It is very polarizing, and it is important to help leaders that are moving around the globe be thoughtful about, informed about, and sensitized to what's happening and the reaction to what's happening. I was traveling outside the US 8 weeks over the last couple of months, and 3 cities in Europe and then 3 cities in Asia and then Australia. And it's different traveling today than it was traveling this time last year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
With that, I think we'll get to some audience questions. So Alicia, if you want to take yourself, there you go. Alicia's going to manage this portion.
Thanks so much, Kim, and thank you, Marilyn and Annmarie, for all that you've shared so far. This has been a really rich conversation. We've got a couple of questions that have come in through the Q&A function that I think we have time to get to here. Annmarie, earlier you said, one bad leader can undo the work of 100 good. What do you do about someone who is kind of embodying that toxic rock star archetype in an organization? Maybe they're getting really good business results for their function, but are really impacting negatively the overall organizational culture.
Yeah. How funny you asked this question, given my morning. So I think that I go to the intentional culture, the conscious culture, right? You have to live by the principles that you're setting out for, and I think the you have to have an unapologetic conversation with that combination of executives that fall into that, quote unquote, one bad. Um, and coach the CEO and executives around that executive to give that same feedback. So it can't just be one person is giving the feedback, because then you're just going to be that person who gave the feedback. The system has to, pith, if you will, that behavior. I am optimistic that more often, when people appreciate the negativity around an executive, that that the system will manage it. But if you're talking about some of the systems Marilyn sees and recognizes as less toxic, then the intervention has to be a little bit bolder, I think, than it might be if you're in a healthier culture. I don't love rock stars. I find them to be beautiful on stage, and then when they get off stage, then they have to behave like the rest of us.
And intervention is required.
And interventions required. Yeah.
And both Annmarie and I agree that people truly appreciate hearing the truth, even if they don't appreciate it immediately.
Right. Well, and it's unfortunate to the person, because the system is talking about that behavior anyway, and so it's respectful to give them the benefit, and they can choose how to behave with it, and their choice on how to behave will be telling as to whether or not. Yeah. But we all know that one bad leader that ruins it for the 99 good.
Definitely. And Marilyn, Kim, in your partnership with organizations, have there been moments where you've sort of seen someone in that role functioning within a company and needed to support, whatever your contact is within an organization or the greater leadership team at large in kind of facilitating those conversations?
Oh, yes. Um, and I think we use a multi-pronged approach, similar to what Annmarie described. We need to let the CEO know, typically. I mean, we're talking about normally it's a member of an executive team or a senior leader. And so the CEO needs to be aware, because it's going to be a reflection on them. It's often someone they value for their ability to do the work, but they need to understand the implications of the other piece of what's going on in terms of the culture.
Yeah.
And so we need to have that challenging conversation, and we have. There's one company I can think of in particular where we've had to be really specific about, we know this person is valued in many ways, and here's how they're damaging not only the entire leadership team, but your credibility with the organization. And we often, sometimes we also have to intervene with the person, and have the conversation with the person to say, here's how you're showing up. Here's the look, here are the results of things like an engagement survey or 360 or both 360 engagement survey, Hogan assessment, whatever tools we have at our disposal that are qualitative in addition to the quantitative feedback that we have heard. And we give specific examples that can be painful. And they say, and there's this shock and awe that came out of your mouth. And
Yeah.
now people are repeating it, but there's still this shock and awe that, like, oh, yeah, you said that. And now, and when faced with that, sometimes, as Annmarie said, sometimes people then are willing to say, I don't really want that to be my reputation, and change. And sometimes they don't. But that's why you have to include that person, whoever that person reports to, and so that they understand what the fallout implications can be.
I think too, Marilyn, as we've managed through a lot of this, there's a difference between that one person that's underdeveloped versus immature versus unethical versus toxic, right? I mean, and I would, like you just described, I would intervene differently depending on how I assess that situation. Sometimes somebody is just underdeveloped and they just need a little bit of love and cuddling. And sometimes someone is toxic and they need a real kick in the pants, right?
I'll also add, just kind of on the flip side of that, in the work we do, I mean, calling out, a manager that's toxic or any of those things, we also call out managers that are doing things when
Really
we're
well.
doing really well, right? Because to your
Yeah.
point about recognition, it doesn't always happen. And so if you find a manager that's has their team is responding and they're doing really well, the senior leadership might not know that necessarily.
Right.
So we'll also bring that to their attention.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
So, Marilyn, at the outset of the conversation, you mentioned a nonprofit that has sort of a deeply embedded, maybe problematic culture, and the individual that you were speaking with, their challenges existing within that culture. Say you're a senior leader in an organization like that. Where do you begin? What are the first steps to moving the needle on course correcting an organization's culture?
Well, I think you need to have some transparent, honest, conversations. Well, always honest, but transparent conversations with the leadership team and the CEO, and lay out, here's what I observe. Here's where I think we could make changes. Here's where I think we need to make some course corrections. And here's the risk, here's the risks if we don't, and here's the opportunities if we do. And I'm happy to, offer to work toward the positive change. I think you have to, I do believe, instead of just posing a problem, you go in with, here's what I see as an issue and here's what I see as potential solutions. I always think that's a positive way to bring up issues to a leader. And so that would be the approach I would recommend, to say, here's what I see as some issues, here's what I see as some potential solutions. And then I think you have to assess for yourself, is this a culture you want to remain in?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because ultimately it may not be. It may be a place you don't want to be.
Yeah. And I think, Marilyn, that's a really important point because there are as many cultures as there are styles of people, and you don't have to always be in a culture that you don't feel like you can do your best work. And I often find people feeling so constricted and hurt by, the culture not being what they need it to be. And sometimes the coaching is, it's okay to let go of this situation and go to some other situation where you feel, embraced for who you are and embraced for the kind of style in which you need to work. And, it's a employees market out there. And yes, the economy is a little tricky right now. So for sure. But, you don't, with remote work, you don't have to sit in a system that isn't,
Yeah.
isn't helping you be your best worker.
Yeah. I mean, I always think you do your best to see if you can make things better. And if you can't, move on.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I mean, we talked about some cultures are move fast and other cultures are more embracing let's brainstorm, and other cultures are like, no, we don't have time for that. We're just going to crank things out. You have to be in the culture that fits for you. And if and this particular culture does not want to make changes, they want to keep things the way they are, which may not, this person thinks don't work, then it may be time to move.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So as we wrap up, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing, both of you, for sharing your expertise and your wisdom, and really showing us that behaviors and systems do impact culture. So with that, thank you. I'm so grateful for both of you in my network, and thank you to everyone that's on the call and whoever watches it in the future. We hope you take away some information that will help your culture, improve your culture. So with that, thank you so much, and we'll see you soon. Take care.